Voices from the basement. You ever get that feeling that your house just isn't right? Like it's got a personality of its own? I never used to think like that. But after what happened, I can't shake the feeling that my house, my childhood home, is alive in ways I never understood. I moved back in a few months ago. My parents retired to Florida, and since the house was paid off, they offered it to me instead of selling it. It made sense. I was between apartments, trying to save money. I figured I'd stay a year, maybe fix the place up a little. It was an old house built in the 50s, but solid. The basement, though, that's a different story. Growing up, I never liked going down there. It was unfinished, just concrete walls, a few support beams, and an old workbench my dad never used. The single light bulb overhead cast these long shadows, and I always felt like something was waiting in the dark corners, just out of sight. But, kid fears. You grow out of them. At least that's what I thought. The first night back, I heard it. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard this faint murmur, like a conversation happening just beneath the floorboards. At first, I thought maybe I left the TV on, but when I got up, the house was silent, except for the voices. I couldn't make out words, just the sound of them. Muted, low, like a radio playing in another room. They were coming from the basement. I told myself it was the house settling, or maybe the old pipes groaning. But night after night, it continued. Some nights it was barely a whisper. Other times it was frantic, like an argument happening just beneath my feet. One night I got brave, or stupid. I grabbed a flashlight, stood at the basement door, and listened. The voices were clearer now, fast, overlapping, almost frantic. My hand hesitated on the knob. The air felt thick, charged, like the house itself was holding its breath. I opened the door. Silence. I stood there, flashlight beam cutting into the darkness, waiting for something, anything, to move. But there was nothing. Just concrete walls, the old workbench, and dust. So much dust. I told myself I was imagining things. That's what stress does, right? It makes you hear things that aren't there. But then I saw the footprints. They were faint, barely more than smudges in the dust, but they were there, leading from the center of the basement to the stairs. I hadn't been down there since moving back. That night, I barely slept. I tried to ignore it, to act like everything was fine, but the voices grew louder, clearer. I started catching bits of words, pleading, desperate. Help us. Don't let him know. He's listening. That last one, he's listening, sent a chill through me. Then, one night, something changed. I woke up to the sound of the basement door creaking open. My bedroom is at the end of the hall, but I could see the stairway from my bed, and in the dim light I saw it. Just for a second, a shadow, taller than any person should be, moving at the top of the basement stairs. I froze. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. The voices rose in a frantic chorus, pleading, warning, but over them, something else, a single voice deeper than the rest. Go back to sleep. And just like that, the basement door shut. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I don't know what's down there. I don't want to know. The house is still mine. My parents don't know why I refuse to go back. But every so often when I drive past, I swear I see the basement light flicker on.
Something in the basement. I never liked the basement in my house. Even as a kid, I avoided it as much as possible. It wasn't unfinished or creepy looking, it was just wrong. The air always felt stale, the lights flickered at random, and no matter how many times we replaced the bulbs, shadows clung to the corners like they belonged there. When my parents passed, the house became mine. I thought about selling it, but something held me back. Nostalgia, maybe. Or guilt. So, I moved in. For the first few nights, everything was normal, quiet. Then, I started hearing it. A soft, scratching noise. It wasn't loud, just faint enough that I could almost convince myself I imagined it. But it happened every night around 3 a.m., always coming from the basement. At first, I ignored it. I'd roll over, pull the covers up, and pretend I didn't hear a thing. But the longer I stayed, the worse it got. The scratching turned into shuffling. A slow, dragging sound, like something was moving across the concrete floor. Then came the breathing. It was deep, raspy, just beneath the vent in my bedroom. I could hear it at night, steady and slow, like something was standing at the bottom of the basement stairs. Waiting. One night, I'd had enough. I grabbed a flashlight, went to the basement door, and stood there listening. Silence. I opened the door, stepped onto the first stair, and clicked on the light. Nothing. Just concrete walls, storage boxes, and an old workbench covered in dust. But the air was different. Thick, damp, like the basement had been sealed shut for years. I was about to leave when I noticed something strange. The concrete in the center of the basement floor looked wrong. The color was slightly off, the texture rougher than the rest, and then I saw them. Small scratches around the edges, like someone had clawed at the floor trying to get out. I ran upstairs and didn't look back. That night, I barely slept. The house was silent, but I felt it. That weight pressing against my chest, that presence just beneath me. The next morning, I called a contractor, told him I wanted to renovate the basement. He came by, took one look at the floor, and frowned. "This part here," he said, pointing at the off-colored section, "looks like someone patched it up." "Poured new concrete?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, but they didn't do a great job. Could have been a rush job." A rush job. Like someone wanted to bury something in a hurry. I told him to break it open. I stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, trying to ignore the sick feeling in my stomach as he started chipping away at the floor. Then he stopped. You might want to see this." I stepped down cautiously. The hole wasn't deep, maybe a foot or two, but inside, wrapped in rotted cloth, was a set of bones. Small ones. Human. I felt my stomach turn. The contractor called the cops. The house became a crime scene. The bones were old, decades at least. No one knew who they belonged to. But that night, for the first time since I moved in, the house was silent. The scratching was gone. The breathing was gone. Whatever was in the basement wasn't there anymore, and I wasn't staying to find out where it went.
After the murder. I didn't mean to do it. That's the first thing I told myself as I stood over the body, my hands shaking, my breath coming too fast. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, but there he was, lifeless, sprawled across the basement floor, blood pooling in the cracks of the concrete. The knife was still in my hand, warm, sticky. I don't even remember picking it up. The basement was the only place I could think of to hide him. No windows, no prying eyes, just cold cement walls and a floor that had held its fair share of secrets. I had to be smart, careful. I found a tarp behind the old workbench, thick with dust. I wrapped him up, ignoring the way his limbs bent wrong, the way his head lolled to one side. I worked fast. My mind buzzed, but my body knew what to do. Dig, bury, forget. The shovel hit something hard about 2 feet down. Wood. A plank, maybe. I pushed more dirt aside, and that's when I saw it. Fingers. Small, brittle, curled like they had been reaching for something. I scrambled back, my breath catching in my throat. The bones were old, yellowed with time, but they were human. I wasn't the first. Someone else had buried their secret here long before me. And in that silence, in the thick, suffocating dark of the basement, I heard it. A whisper. Not words, just the faintest breath against my ear. Then the tarp moved. Not much. Just a shift, a tremor. I told myself it was settling, that bodies do that sometimes. Then it moved again. The whisper turned into something else. A sigh. A breath. A voice that wasn't mine. "You shouldn't have done that." The basement light flickered. and the tarp began to rise.